Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the OTT.X Wednesday webinar series. I'm Eric Hansen, and on behalf of everybody here at OTT.X, I want to thank you all for joining us today to the series where we bring you insightful, thought-provoking presentations across a broad spectrum of OTT-related topics from thought leaders across our industry. Today, we're excited to have with us two experts on the end-to-end value chain in media. First, Amos Biegun, who is the Global Head of Rights and Royalties at Vistex, and Richard Whittington, Senior Vice President and Entertainment of Media and Entertainment Industries and Customer Advisory at SAP. Amos is a 25-plus-year veteran of the enterprise software sector, specializing in rights and royalties management software. Throughout his career, Richard has been involved with the music, media, and consumer products industries, and has been instrumental in supplying comprehensive solutions to hundreds of companies globally, including the largest players in all of these industries. At Vistex, Richard continues to focus on this space as Global Head of Rights and Royalties. We also want to thank Vistex for participating in our webinar series today and for the support of OTT.X. Thank you, Vistex. I know we're all looking forward to their presentation entitled Media Industry Cloud and E2E Value Chain. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amos to introduce our esteemed speaker, our other esteemed speaker this morning, SAP's Richard Whittington. Good morning, Amos.
Good morning, Eric. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. And it's a real pleasure to be joined by Richard Whittington, who most of my 25 years in this industry I've worked with in some shape or form. But Richard, hello, first of all.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
I'm going to put up a slide so we have some visual stimulation as we speak to all the attendees. And thanks for everyone for joining. So Richard, it's great that we're in a sort of boring industry. When we were planning this a week ago, AT&T Warner Discovery was nowhere to be seen, and neither was Amazon MGM. So first of all, maybe let's start from the beginning. Maybe you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your current role and responsibilities, and maybe a word or two about recent news announcements, because we'd be remiss if we didn't mention them today.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Richard Whittington. I work for SAP. We have 25 industries at SAP. I have the privilege and honor of leading the media and entertainment industry. I've been doing this for a little while now. Prior to this role, I was with IBM, PwC IBM, as part of the PwC sell-off of PwC Consulting, where I was a partner in the media practice. I worked with a lot of the companies on the West Coast here and the East Coast, actually, with respect to media. So a bit of a checkered background. I actually started my career as a teacher in the UK. Yeah, it's funny. So it was Sunday. We had a big meeting on Monday. I can't say who it was with, but it was president level. So I was working Sunday on some slides at 3 o'clock my time, West Coast, right? By 6 a.m. the next morning, they were obsolete. So an incredible weekend. But I think it's indicative, right? I think what we're seeing is two things, really. One is a recognition that content was pretty sparse for the last year or so. And again, I'm focused on the film entertainment segment since you brought that up. So it was pretty sparse because obviously production was on hold. And so there's sort of a rush to grab as many of these libraries. And, you know, I'm not privy to what's going on with Amazon and MGM, but that has to be a library play to the largest extent. And then on, you know, the Warner Media one and the Discovery one, both of which I have to get a plug in here, are SAP customers. We're seeing this transformation to a scale model, and you know it's going to be interesting in the next 6 to 9 months to see how the industry shakes out, whether we end up with sort of 3 predominant players, obviously Netflix being one of them, and then some smaller players. But I was kind of reflecting back as we were getting ready for this. I've been through VHS to DVD, that was driven by Warner. I've been through DVD to Blu-ray. I've been through DVD to digital locker. I've been through the Netflix thing, and now the streaming wars. And really, that's all in the last 12 to 15 years. And I think, on the music side, which obviously you're fairly familiar with, we've gone from vinyl to CD. You know, we never had the concept of really returns in the vinyl world, to iTunes, which is now defunct to a large extent, to streaming. So never a dull industry. It'll be interesting to see how Warner Media breaks out with Discovery. Obviously, David's going to run the combined entity. But there was an article, I don't know if you saw it, in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday about Jason and Warner Media and HBO Max, and that was already irrelevant by Monday morning. Incredible.
Which is incredible, because ultimately we're looking at potentially 5 global dominant players, and then in large territories outside North America, there'll be regional players. Like in the UK, you'll have a BBC, in Germany, ARD, and they still have a lot of ground in those territories. So it's definitely going to be interesting how this shapes up over the next 12 to 18 months.
But I think you raise a good point there too. I mean, the international market is different too. You see TF1, and I forget who they're in discussions to merge with the two. You're seeing that consolidation also overseas. So it's not just a US phenomenon, especially
N6, I believe it is.
Yeah. And so you're seeing this sort of transformation going on all over the industry, and pretty much it's guaranteed after the transformation you'll see a consolidation.
So it's a direct to consumer, and the old cliche of content is king, sort of coming together in brute force.
Yeah, but I'm also kind of thinking customer experience is also king plus one. I think, I'll give you an example. So the content we consume today is pretty two-dimensional, right? We consume it and, we might make a few comments on social media about it. I think the next level will be fan engagement around the content. I think that's the whole customer experience thing. Creating community. Let's pick a show. This Is Us. Creating a community around This Is Us. We saw it with Game of Thrones, but really monetizing that is sort of to me the next wave of OTT 5.0, if you want to call it that.
Absolutely. And Richard, so it's great. It's great when we're in an industry that we always have to be on our toes. How did you get into the media and entertainment industry? What were your early years? Where were your early years spent?
Just trying to date me. So no, I mean, it's funny because, as I said at the beginning, I started my regular career, corporate career in American Express in the early days of electronic funds transfer. And then I was on an expat deal. I ended up. I joined a US consulting company that did business process reengineering. And out of that, I got a call to go be a partner at PwC, which I clearly wasn't qualified for. So I said, no, I'll do a senior manager role. Became partner shortly after that. There's a lesson in there: over exceed and under promise. And then, or the other way around. And then IBM, obviously acquired it. So my first sort of media project was really for then there were three sort of DirecTV, Dish, and there was a company called PrimeStar, which was a combination of 5 of the cable companies pretending they wanted to get into direct satellite broadcast. So I did a customer reengineering project for them, and that kind of got me the bug. And my next project was for a large media company in Burbank around location-based entertainment, and then after that I was bitten. And so, PwC came to the table. I did a lot of projects. I did, the early DVD stuff at Warner Home Video. Had the privilege of working with Warren Lieberfarb, the grandfather or the father of DVD. And, it just rolled on from there. And as I say, it's you said it, it's never a dull industry. Some of my colleagues, I feel sorry for some of my colleagues in some of these other industries that are a bit more predictable. Not to name any, but you'd never find me in utilities. So it's just, and I think it's multifaceted, right? I mean, we're talking about streaming and OTT today, but the publishing industry is going through great transformation. The music industry, as we both know, is going through great transformation. Even the ad agency business is going through transformation. So it's really, it's something that is relevant to most people's lives. And it's dynamic, and it keeps me on my toes, as you said.
Oh, absolutely. And we're involved in what happens behind the scenes and what happens on the consumer side. So it's fascinating. And SAP, what were the early years of SAP like? Because you've been leading this business unit division of SAP for quite some time. We met a long time ago.
Yeah. So it's like the Hotel California. Once you check in, you can't check out.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the early days and what was their view on this industry and how has that changed? And within.
That's a good point, and I'll put it in an industry context too, software industry context. So when I arrived at SAP, we had a presence in media. Our footprint was really around publishing in Germany, and we had some of the studios on board, obviously, particularly for financials. But when I arrived, SAP was a very single-focused company. around ERP, finance, supply chain. And as I said, NBC Universal at the time, or Disney and Sony, are all implementing SAP. But what I found was a very deep, verticalized industry solution that the cycle of innovation was very slow. And I often use the analogy of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. The bigger industries had a bigger spoon for the porridge or the oatmeal. The smaller industries always had to fight for the development that was left over. And so as a company, SAP was also faced with a pivot point, right, around this transformation to cloud. And often put it in industry context, right? Physical product like DVD and CD was great, but streaming was the future. And we faced that same issue around on-premise software versus cloud. And so we took this opportunity to really have that innovator's dilemma. I mean, we were making lots of money on the on-prem model, but we knew the future, and the future still is, in the cloud-based consumption model. And so over the course of the years, we've kind of reskilled both our big company and both our media industry to be much more focused around almost direct-to-consumer in a way with our cloud offerings. And so it's interesting, as a lot of our customers are now going through, driven by these events like direct-to-consumer, OTT, and transform to scale, are going through their own journeys about modernization. We had to do that too.
And SAP introduced the partner concept. Can you tell us a little about what the drive, what it was referred to as solution extension, other partners? That's where Vistex and SAP are very close on. Can you tell us a little bit about the rationale and what is expected of the partner relationship? Because it's different than many other partner relationships one sees in the software industry.
Yeah, I think there was a recognition, and I use a proxy because I think sometimes proxies help. So a large part of Apple's success on the iPhone was the ecosystem development environment that they created, right? So the phone is the phone. And much like SAP's Intelligence Suite is the core, is the equivalent of the phone, we really needed to broaden the ecosystem to include a lot of partners, not that could just implement our solution, but also could develop last mile extensions to it. And so we'll talk a little bit about the industry cloud in a moment, and we'll kind of put some bones on that flesh, or flesh on that bones. But it really became a recognition that and I had an old boss that used to say, always partner with someone who wakes up every morning and is thinking about nothing else than the thing that you partner with them for. And that was it. I mean, we have many, as we transformed as SAP, we have many competing initiatives internally for resource, and all resource is scarce. And so the partner model made sense to extend our reach, our footprint, our focus on really parts of the industry, and we'll use rights and royalties as an example, right? Parts of the industry where there were specialists in the marketplace that had market share, that had domain expertise, that had a go-to-market organization that we could leverage and partner with. And that partnering can range everything from light touch you see on the SAP App Store to full-on solution extension where we co-share responsibility for the delivery. So there's sort of this range, and it's ever evolving, to be honest. There's this range of partnering options that companies can do with SAP. And so part of my job is to constantly be out in the market looking at who's the best in class for production accounting, who's the best in class for travel and expenses for media, for example, or production procurement marketplaces.
Well, that's where Vistex and SAP are closely aligned, not just in rights and royalties, but in other industries where SAP is dominant. And
look, before you leave that,
from the partner's perspective, no, please go ahead.
No, I was going to say, before you leave that, why did we pick Vistex, right? Vistex had a traditionally long history with SAP in actually consumer products for incentive compensation management. The company had the vision, Sanjay had the vision to acquire Counterpoint, which obviously you came from. And so by doing that, acquired a lot of domain expertise rapidly. And so it was a natural progression of our existing relationship to extend that to rights royalties. And these things are tough to do. There's always 1,000 reasons why you can't do it, but I think we push through and have now got significant wins under our belt in both music and film to prove out this concept of the last mile partner extensions.
And what I want to say from a partner's perspective, it's an incredible experience because when we go to market together on many opportunities, I've never felt the experience of being under one umbrella. We are one voice, we are one bid, we are one sometimes we wear the same T-shirts when we do some of these bids, because the idea is that the partner is part of the DNA of SAP, at least at the top end of that solution extension, which is, for me, was a very unique experience coming from a direct to market model, which I worked with. I worked in most of my career.
It's quite simple, right? Use the iPhone analogy again. If I have an app on the iPhone, do I really even know who the developer is? I just want it to work.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't want it to mess up anything else. And so, this concept of premium qualification, the process you go through, at the far extreme of partnering, the process of that qualification, the kicking the tires, the due diligence is all there. Because ultimately, if I'm a client, I'm buying a solution from SAP or Vistex, and I want it to work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Let's move on to the end-to-end value chain. I'm going to reshare my desktop here and show a slide that sort of depicts that. Give me 1 second.
That was my pre-COVID picture. I look fat.
That's mine from a few years ago as well. So, explain what the intention of the end-to-end value chain, what the benefits, and how SAP positions it, if you wouldn't mind.
I mean, one of the hardest things to do in life is to take something complex and distill it down to something simple. And the danger sometimes of doing that is you make it too simple and it's meaningless. Hopefully this seems to resonate pretty well with our executive customers when we meet with them. So we said, and again, we'll focus on, given the focus of OTT, we'll focus on the broadcast entertainment segment. At the highest level, there's really 6 sort of cycles in the value chain. There's this idea to green light, there's this green light to production, there's production to distribution, there's distribution to consumption, the consumption to experience, and then what we've called title lifecycle management, which is really the cradle to grave management of the financials of that piece of content. And then you add to that an experience, whether that's a product experience, a brand experience, or a customer experience, or even an employee experience across the top. And then 2 other pieces that I think go across the full value chain is the insight or the intelligence. And then lastly, the spend management. If you look at and I think off the top of my head, in 2019, the top 10 US media customers spent about $108 billion on content production. And that's only going to accelerate, right? And if you look at the sort of the spend management piece of it, that does span the full value chain. But let me break it down a little bit further, because the expectation is that SAP owns this value chain end to end. The expectation is that there are different players in different parts of this value chain. But back to our sort of Apple phone analogy, when it comes together, it's an end-to-end process. And this is sort of somewhat there, and some of whoops. You go back.
No, maybe I must have pressed something, please.
If you go back to the picture, the blue circle on the right-hand side, our right to win, our right to serve our customers is really strong. As you get further to the left, like for example, green light to production, we probably don't have as much value as let's pick a partner's name, for example, Avid, right? But what we do believe in is being able to bring all the production statuses, scheduling, costs, all into think of a flight deck on a plane, all into a command center, so that the media executive of tomorrow, or even partly today, can have a sense of where he or she sits on spend and scheduling, because there's so much money flowing across this value chain now. It's really an imperative to do that. So how do we do that? Which is probably a good question. If you want to click through.
I'm going to pause for 1 minute before we introduce the Media Industry Cloud, because I think we're about halfway through, just to see if there are any questions. Maybe Eric, if anything's come through, and then we'll continue with our discussion. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so folks, if you're interested in asking some questions of our esteemed guest, please do. There's a Q&A bin. You can drop something in there, or feel free to post into the chat as well. Love to hear from you, and you can feel free to do that over the course of the rest of the presentation too, because I think we'll have a little bit of time at the end. I was just thinking about as you're presenting this discussion, Richard, I really appreciate the visual here across the entire value chain. I think that's I actually was admiring the level of complexity that is here without being overly complex. So it's not too simplified. So I think you hit the nail on the head. One of the things that having also myself been in this industry for a while, and particularly in the operations and supply chain side, which I think would probably go towards the right side of your diagram here, distribute and monetize content.
Right.
One of the things we've I think continually sort of bemoaned in this space is that we're downstream from the post-production and the production and the green light by it will here 3 rotating circles. And it turns out that that actually causes some problems for us when we're trying to distribute content, knowing what might be coming down the pipe, knowing how to identify it, getting the rights and all of the information about it in an accurate way out to all of the distributors. And so like IDs are, something that is a great example of that. And so now we have this thing called IDER. And we have these other IDs like an ALID, which is a concept for things. And you don't realize it, but when you're, let's say, a distributor of online content, you're working with a company, let's say, like Disney, it really helps to know as far in advance as you can what you might be receiving, so that you can plan for it. The problem is if there's no way to identify it, in terms of identifiers or anything, then you just are searching file shares based on names. So all this to say that this stuff really is connected, and having knowledge of it, and of the, I guess a way that to understand all of it together is vital.
Exactly. So if it's okay, Eric, if there are no questions, what I'll do is I'll flick through. We're going to start introducing the how, which is really the Media Industry Cloud. And if questions arise, maybe we can deal with them at the end, if that's okay.
That sounds great. Let's
Perfect. So Richard, I'm going to hand you back to you and jump one screen ahead. So we talked about the end-to-end value chain. That's the
guide rail, yeah.
Diagram. Now the how. So how do you make these circles talk to each other in a more simple and integrated fashion?
Okay, so thank you. So how do you do that? Yeah, the secret sauce here, right? I think let me talk through this picture. Maybe I can answer that by doing that. So remember we talked a little bit about these last mile extensions, and we talked about the concept of the Apple iPhone as the intelligence suite. So think of the intelligence suite, the boxes here in yellow, are things that you could procure and buy from SAP, whether that's the Media Product Master, to Eric's point about tracking the asset from green light all the way through to fully amortized, whether it's solutions like, and I don't want to get into product names, but billing and revenue. One of the complexities of OTT behind the scenes are things like AVOD, SVOD, TVOD as business models, and I could consume the same piece of content that I have rights for in a variety of different business models, and someone's got to figure out who gets paid for that. And so we're proud to be behind the largest growth streaming service in the world, as part of that equation of trying to figure out who gets paid for what. It's different from royalties. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. But things like spend management for procurement when you're doing a production, things like travel and expenses on a production, for Concur or Ariba from our solution set. That's part of this thing called the Intelligent Suite, and it sits on something called the Business Technology Platform, which, if some of you have been around SAP for a while, you've heard names like HANA or machine learning as a thing. That's all part of this Business Technology Platform that the Intelligent Suite sits upon. And the benefit of that is things like in-memory data, so you can actually have insight that you can action within the same system as opposed to a reporting or data warehouse kind of system. But then you get into the purple stuff. And the purple stuff are things that we are partnering with. So obviously today we're on the phone with you with rights and royalties here. But we have other partners too with Vistex. We have other partners too that have built concept approval, deal green lighting solutions that sit on top of the Intelligence Suite, use the Media Product Master, so that sort of flow starts from the idea through the green light. And then we have apps like amortization, because amortization is becoming more complex now in these different playout models. It used to be you create an ultimate and you could fairly well predict the revenue spend. Now the question is, if I create a piece of content, which distribution channel am I going to go into first to make the maximum ROI back on that content investment? And so the other nice thing about the purple box, if you want to click one more, that might help, is you can bring all think of these as Lego bricks. And I know I've used a lot of analogies, but it does help. These are Lego bricks that we have in our tool set here between partners and SAP that we bring together in a chain to support that value chain. So here's an example for film, concept approval into the media product master. You can subscribe to that, then we can figure out who we have to pay for that. Then we use our customer experience solutions to figure out, did you actually like that content? Are you going to churn? And create these predictive models around churn. Then, and really the rights and royalties should be always back at the front of the value chain here a little bit. Do we have the rights, for example, to stream this in Spain with English subtitles? All those complex questions that traditionally would have taken a long time to research through paper documents or disconnected systems. This is all in one kind of cloud, if you want. And then the content amortization piece, which is we talked about. And then ultimately, bring all the costs and all the revenues together against a title or a season or an episode or a merchandise campaign. And what was my P&L on that piece of content or that title? And so that's how we join the Lego bricks here from the intelligence suite. If you wanted to do, for example, in a different use case, if you wanted to understand the cost of production, you also probably bring spend management and travel and expenses into the value chain, but it gets a bit crowded up there. But again, the concept here, and I think this is really important, is that our industry cloud solutions have the same user experience as any of the yellow bricks. And I'll caveat that a little bit. We still have a different user experience for spend management and travel and expenses because Concur and Ariba are not quite harmonized into the intelligent suite UX. But from a UX perspective for Media Product Master, for billing and revenue, the user experience and using the same data as that whole intelligent suite across the business technology platform. So that bringing together of the data, so you're not moving data around, which is getting really difficult with the volumes of data we're seeing, is a fundamental principle.
And that I think, to me, that is one of the biggest benefits, is that you have a situation where you're keeping the data static and effectively running processes over it rather than moving data from system to system and process to process. So
and I think to add to that, that data is sitting in memory to a large extent. So, sure. I can see my DSO and say, wait, that's in red in Brazil. Why is DSO in red in Brazil? Day sales outstanding. You can double click down through that into the you're using the system, you're using the data. You're not using data from yesterday, the day before, the week before. You're seeing real life data, and then you can go and action that and say, for example, Amos, you're the MD of Brazil. Why is your DSO so outstanding? Using things like Copilot, which is our version of chat.
And again, one integrated solution, and what we've proven with the HANA environment, which is the SAP database, is highly scalable to a ridiculous number of transactions per hour per day. Really designed for today's media economy. Although it was designed well before today's media economy, works extremely well in today's media economy, where we're talking about tens of millions of transactions a day on some of our mid to large sized accounts.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is on this picture that I would add probably is an infrastructure layer, right? I mean, you can sit this whole thing to a large extent. Obviously, Concur and Ariba are a little different, but let's take the bulk of the intelligence suite, S4HANA. You sit that all in a hyperscale environment, whether that's Azure, whether it's Alibaba if you're in China, or whether it's Google or Amazon here. You can sit all of this, if you wanted a private cloud version, on top of that, the hyperscaler of your choice. If you wanted to go for a public version of the intelligence suite for S4HANA, then you lose that flexibility to pick the hyperscaler.
And Richard, one thing, you can implement any or all of the Lego bricks as makes sense, and you can phase implement. So this is not a one straight line. Otherwise, there's no value. You can realize value in steps, right?
Yeah, I mean, a good example, again, I have to be careful with the use of names, but the fastest growing OTT subscription service, chose to implement billing and revenue to manage the complexity. They haven't implemented customer experience from us or rights and royalties or concept approval. They've just started their journey in the billing and revenue aspect because that was the immediate pain point. But that doesn't mean that they won't move to the next generation of our technology at some point. And frankly, some of these things, if for example, I don't know why you do this, but let's say you're running Oracle for media, you could still have travel and expenses and spend management and human resources management as part of that intelligence suite. But then you're still in that, you still have to move your data around to get it into finance.
And as you said before, you're constantly looking for extra partners, additional features to embellish and enhance this cloud, this media industry cloud.
Yeah, I mean,
this is an expanding ecosystem, not one that's fixed.
No, exactly. That's a great point. I mean, for example, we're talking to a particular company right now that just specializes in production travel. So when a production shifts and suddenly you need to move 10 people to a different location, that's all they do. And they sit in the industry cloud. They're part of our SAP IO, which is our incubator. And they sit on top of Concur. And all they do is create a schematic of what the impact is and give you, as a production planner or line producer, they give you a view of what that travel schedule looks like. And it's, you often hear the concept of edge solutions. That's really on the edge of the intelligence suite. But the beauty of that is that production schedule then books the travel through, in this instance, Concur, which then talks to the intelligence suite. So you start to, as a CFO, you can start to see the impact of moving a schedule, for example. Another example would be one of the challenges in this industry is the gig economy. There's a lot of freelancers, and managing how they get paid, how they get scheduled, how they get onboarded, how they get procured is quite a complex problem. Now, that's not to say we, are moving into the world of studio payroll, because we are not. But there's, this desire to get, if you go back to that other, you don't have to go back to the other chart with the spend management across the bottom, the desire to get those inputs. No, you don't need to go back. The desire to get those inputs into the finance, into the production of a particular title, so you can see in real time. I mean, my goal ultimately in this scenario is to retire the post-production finance wrap up, because 2 weeks after the production ends is not a good time to figure out where you spent the money. Excuse me. So I mean, I think this is, as you say, it's a vision with some parts that are already there. We have projects in play already that are using concept approval with rights and royalties with the intelligence suite. We have them both here in the US and in Europe. We have customers that started their journey, as we talked about, in the billing, revenue, and management. We have others that are starting with the CX. I mean, we bought a company called Qualtrics, which is one of the leading companies around, if not the leading company around customer experience. And so, my hypothesis, or our hypothesis here at SAP, is, as we said earlier, customer experience is going to become king. I think we're in a world of customer acquisition. And we're now going to move to a world of customer delight and customer retention as people contract the number of streaming services they have. So to net it out, the intelligence suite covers both customer experience through finance, through supply chain, through procurement, extended by the industry cloud, all sitting on a business technology platform that sits in the cloud.
Thank you. Richard, that's great. I'm going to move on to the future. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. The first is, when you look at your crystal ball, and I could ask you that last week, and there are two big announcements. But when you look at that crystal ball, what does the next 18 months, 3 years, or 5 years look like? And then I'm going to add to that question: what will SAP and its partners need to do to continue to lead in this space? So it's a two-part question.
What's the next 3 weeks look like? No, right. So let's go with some principles, right? I think, we've come out, and you can't not name the elephant in the room, right? We've come out of a content fest driven by lockdowns and COVID. So I think there's one school of thought that says you're going to see a contraction in the number of streaming services that people have. And I think if you look at Netflix's results and you look at Disney in the last couple of weeks, you're starting to see people throttle back on those streaming services. So I think number one will be an intense focus on acquiring content for the streaming wars. Number two will be an intense focus on monthly. I mean, NBCU call it MAA, which is the amount of time people engage with content. So an intense focus on companies driving engagement with their content, either through a superior user experience or content with a lot of marketing behind it. Number three, I think you'll see consolidation to, as you said, I started to make a list the other day, and the list started getting longer and longer. I mean, there's some big names in this space. I mean, an interesting thing would be to wake up and read that, and this is pure conjecture, that Amazon Studios has spun out into a separate entity from Amazon, right? I mean, they are.
Possible.
It's yeah. I mean, this weekend
everything's possible.
But I think that's one segment. I think in the the news segment, obviously you're still going to see a shift towards news being consumed digitally. That's not going to change. Interesting, during COVID, news consumption went up as people were trying to get the information. But if you come back to the OTT thing, I think consolidation, manic focus on the customer, and increasing complexity on the business model would be the three.
Okay. One thing you said, and it's that there's no solution. Churn or prevention of churn is going to be, there's heavy investment in prevention, is going to be as important as new subscriber acquisition, because when you have such a dense market of big players, you get to certain territories where it is a zero-sum game. Your next subscriber is going to come at the expense, possibly, of one of your competitors. So you cannot afford to lose anyone off the bottom.
But I think also as
customer experience is key for that, in my opinion.
No, sorry. I mean, it's interesting because, again, if you look at different segments of this industry, so newspapers, for example, I did a project for a newspaper a while ago, actually quite a while ago, but they were buying churn. They were buying their own churn. So they would do a promotion. So that's the typical way that people try and do, retention, is to offer you free this or free that. They were buying back their own churn. So people would sign up for it, churn, and then they'd buy them back with an even better offer. And the consumer got knowing that if they kept churning, they get a better and better offer. Same with cell phone plans. I mean, part of the challenge there is that a lot of cell phone companies didn't know if the promotion they were running was profitable. So I think, to answer the second part of your question about how we can help, I think you're going to see media executives come into the picture here that understand content very well, obviously, but have grown up with data and make fact-based data decisions. And that's not saying we didn't before, but I think what that will force is a thirst for real-time data, a thirst for a lot of the predictive stuff to take over the mundane stuff, so that they can focus on things that are going to move the revenue needle. So I think that's another sort of thing that's going to come into play. And of course, we, as many others, can provide solutions in that. I think the differentiation is we wake up every day as a company or as a partner and a company thinking about this industry. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the other competitors in the space yet have that depth of experience and expertise in the industry. That's not meant to be self-serving. That's just the reality. And I think the last part is this industry cloud is going to be really important because things are changing so fast. You need players around the edges that are nimble. I mean, you're not going to change your financial system every 2 years, but you might change the way that you do procurement, for example, or spend analysis.
Or revenue recognition or content amortization and things that you just can't. I agree with you. I totally agree. I think being a partner, one of the huge advantages, again, going to market together, is that when there is an opportunity and there is subscriber revenue management and there is content amortization and there is revenue recognition, because we are so aligned and so fully integrated, we can offer all of it rather than just part of it. And I think in some scenarios, the value of that is price.
Yeah, and I think the other part of it is, you made the point earlier. You can't be in a world today where you back the truck up, right, and say it's all end to end. You can't break it apart. You got to do it all, and it's going to take you millions of years and millions of dollars. It's got to be consumable, and I think this is what moving to the cloud has taught us. it's got to be constantly innovated, it's got to be consumable, and it's got to fit together. And we're still, we still have our parts that we're working on that, but it's got to be cloud first, I think would be the bottom line on that, because people don't have the luxury of, it's like house remodeling, ripping everything out at once. You can't do that. And so I think this Lego brick industry clouds way of approaching the market is the right answer. Now, 3 years, 4 years from now, who knows? And then for us in this software world, the other unknown is the hyperscalers. I mean, do we just become the equivalent of the light bulbs, right? And the power energy generation stations are the Amazons and the Google Cloud. So we work very closely with all of those guys, because you never want to get into a situation where it just becomes a cost-saving play. It needs to be transformation. And again, if we're all honest with each other, I mean, a lot of the infrastructure, maybe not the infrastructure, a lot of the application structure or platform levels were built for an analog media business, and we're not in an analog media business anymore.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you fully. Well, Richard, thank you very much. I'm going to turn back to Eric because I see we're at time. It was such a pleasure talking to you. Can't wait to do it in person again. Yeah. Hopefully in the not too distant future for all of us.
Thank you.
Nice. Yes, thanks, gentlemen. Really interesting presentation, and kind of stirred up a lot of thoughts. For myself, actually, I spent a bunch of time in the past working in the ERP space and have worked with SAP. One of the things that I recalled about a former position when we were doing an SAP implementation was just how much effort it was to implement SAP. It took like a year and a half, really, 2 years to get it implemented. I'm curious about, and this was a long time ago, so back when we were using SQL Server at our company, Microsoft. I don't know if people do that anymore, but I suspect not. But can you talk a little bit about the implementation schedules for SAP in the media and entertainment space?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to put that into context, right? I think the one thing that cloud has brought to the table, one of the key things, is this whole notion of fit to standard. And so, I think we as SAP have invested in things like the Media Product Master, which brings together the experience that we and our systems integrator partners have had, doing all these large implementations over the years. So I think a key part of it is really driving a fit to standard methodology within your company. So let's say you're media company X, then you're going on this journey. No longer doing big global workshops where everyone has their say on how this should work. More this is how it works, how are you going to change your business process conversation should be happening. And so to that extent, the degree to which the solution you pick already has best practices baked in is an advantage. The new paradigm is going to be the change management piece, and how quickly can that user experience be adopted by your finance people, your employees. And so I think that's an important part. And I think the last part is, this sort of notion of customization. You in a cloud world, that's a death sentence, right? I mean, if you customize and the next release comes, it's back to the analogy of the phone, right? We take updates all the time. You need to be in a world where your intelligent suite, your core, is protected from any of those customizations, and extend that if you need to by using the SAP Cloud Platform, now called Business Technology Platform, to write applications that are cloud-based applications that use that same data, much the same way that our partners have done that. So you as a customer can do that, you as a SI partner can do that, you as an industry vendor can do that extension. But the key thing is you got to implement it. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The BBC pivoted from a public broadcast model to a commercial model. They went globally live on SAP's Intelligent Suite in around about 12 months. And they would say, if you asked them, they would say, had we got our data cleaned up in the beginning, we could have done it faster. Cox Media down in Atlanta just went live in a COVID world in about 8 months. So you're seeing much faster implementation times, but it requires an SI that can push fit to standard conversation.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, we're big fans of standards at OTT.X, in the supply chain and elsewhere. You talked a little bit, Richard, you mentioned that increasing, as one of the trends that you saw, increasing complexity of the business model. I'm interested in that. I double click a little bit. What are some examples of that, or what?
Well, I mean, if you look, let's use two examples. So Disney is an example as a subscriber base, right? On Netflix is probably the simplest one, right? So you pay $9.99 a month, and then they just have to basically settle behind the scenes as to what content played, much the same way that you would today for royalties. Then you move into something like a Peacock that has 3 tiers, right? They have the free tier, which is ad supported. Then you have partial tier, and then you have an extreme tier for different for different price points. Each of those has a different settlement model behind it. So if I'm consuming content for the free, right, I'm watching ads in between that. I now have to prove to the advertiser the engagement, and then probably have a tiered structure behind that to pay based on the engagement that I delivered. Whereas if I'm just doing it as a pure subscription at the other end, my model's a lot cleaner. And then the third model in the middle there is the transactional one, where maybe I buy the movie on, like I did last night. What did we watch last night? I can't remember. See, content doesn't stick, customer experience does.
So we bought again.
We bought. Yeah, I got 24 hours. Right. I bought a movie last night as part of Prime. So now Amazon has to settle up, with whichever studio that was, for that transaction. So a lot of it is, if I got the content from one studio, but I consume it the consumer consumes it by these different models, I have to settle up in different ways.
I'll add to that, Eric. Today, a lot of these models of licensing are relatively straightforward. The way Netflix procures content, they'll license a bundle, they'll make the money on the subscriber, the owners of the content get paid their license fee, and those are the royalties they might have to share with their participants. But what happens one day if a producer or a production company says, look, Netflix, I'll accept that license fee, but if my piece of content is the reason that you're attracting new subscribers or getting more eyeballs onto your platform, I want to share in that success. Of course, Netflix or others, I'm just picking on them, won't want to do that, but eventually they will. And then they'll have to move to a hybrid model, a little bit like Spotify distributes royalties. It doesn't pay a license fee, it pays a share of its subscription fee based on consumption. Now, using the SAP Intelligent Media Suite or the Media Industry Cloud with partners like us, with the billing and revenue solution, you're able to add these additional business models within your existing framework. You don't have to go and re-implement. You don't have to say, oh my God, I didn't think about that. I need a new royalty system. I need a new billing and revenue system. These are models that we can accommodate as the business expands. So that is the advantage. You make the investment up front, easier today with this templated fit the standard, but you have that degree of future proofing because it brings all of these practices from all of these different industries into one single environment. And that's the real difference. And that is one of the benefits that I've had coming from a company that had a solution for each industry. We've now harmonized into one application that can service all industries. Mm-hmm. So if the music industry has a royalty model that tomorrow is the next royalty model for the film industry, you switch it on. You don't have to say, oh, I never thought about it for the film industry solution, and I have to build it or customize it. So that's what we're thinking. How do you leverage? How do you make it easier? How do you eke out as much value from these investments as you can?
Yeah, as an ops person, like some of the ideas and the crazy concepts that our business development and marketing people can come up with for licensing things, kind of, it just gives me hives, I think. But it also it is really important to be able to execute on those things. I mean, that is how you get to be, you move ahead in this industry, is to be able to take those ideas and execute on them. The systems underlying your billing, your rights, your management, licensing, all of that are crucial to be able to do that.
Within reason, your system should never restrict your ability to do business, transact, even in the most creative way, within reason. You get to, extra edge cases, but that shouldn't be the constraint. But unfortunately, what we see in industries, many industries, is that the business practices are constrained by the back office systems that support them. Right. And that's a real concern.
Yeah.
Especially today, we have to be nimble, you have to be scalable. It's a real concern.
Now, we bemoan that a lot. There's a lot of creative ideas that get, well, yeah, we can implement that, but it's going to take, 6 months. And sorry that you have this great idea, but or you have an option to license some content in this really creative way, but we couldn't make that happen right now. Yeah, interesting. I have a couple of questions from our attendees here. One, where do you see growth for SAP M&E Industry Cloud coming from?
Well, I think it's a good question. So if I think of it as a media segment answer, obviously this direct-to-consumer streaming segment is the segment that we're really kind of focused on right now because it's hot. I do think there's a pivot question out there, and I just wrote this down. Back to your answer about 5 years, Amos. In 5 years, will it be technology companies that do media, or will it be media companies that do technology? And I think that's the one single question 5 years out. So to answer the one that was asked specifically, we're seeing a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and so we're selling back to people that we already had. So I think some of the revenue is going to come from that. I mean, without giving a client name away, we are just about to start on a big transformation with one of the big streaming services again. I think media companies will take the opportunity to move to hyperscalers, and as part of that, I see revenue coming from this. This guy wasn't asked by Workday, right? This question, so that's a joke.
I don't know.
No, but I mean, I think if I was a CIO of a media company right now, I'd be looking at how do I move to a hyperscaler, but year 2, how do I take some of the savings I may have accrued in year 1 and transform and re-energize my my basic applications, my intelligence suite, if you like, by using some of those cost savings. And I think 5G is a play for us too. I have a colleague in telco that's focused on just 5G, and we think there's some revenue in there for us. I don't think it's going to come from business as usual, right? I mean, it's definitely not going to come from business as usual. So without giving too many trade secrets away, but to net it out, transformation and scale and maximizing media value would be the 2 big topics of focus. And in the middle there is this whole customer piece. I mean, we doubled down on Qualtrics acquisition. They're doing really well. We've got our own customer data platform, so we'll be competing with the Adobes and the Salesforces in that space. So again, it's sort of this yin and yang of the front office and the back office. And so ultimately, to your point, Eric, you don't want the marketing guy come back saying, I had dinner with so-and-so last night, I put together a new plan, and the IT guys go, well, that's going to take 7 months to implement.
Yeah. Well, I think we're at time. Gents, thanks so much for the insights and for jumping on with us today. It's been really interesting. Really enjoyed hearing from you, and it's refreshing to have a discussion about operations and running the business that is about enabling the ideas, the concepts, and the competition that we are seeing more and more of all the time. So with that, I will thank everybody for joining and being a part of our discussion today. And I want to thank everybody, all of our attendees as well for jumping on with us today for this edition of the OTT.X Wednesday webinar series. As always, session was recorded and will be available shortly on the OTT.X website at OTT.X.org. There's a whole lot of other valuable videos and presentations from our online events for the last year. Please do take advantage of that. Also want to remind everybody to mark your calendars for our upcoming events, including our popular and invigorating roundtable discussion group. It's going to be taking place next week on Thursday, May 27th, beginning at 9:30 a.m. We've got some great topics, including AFTs and those NFTs. So we can learn a little bit more about what those are and how they might be applicable for us. Also, do remember on June 23rd and 24th, we're holding the summer edition of OTT.X Online Live, where topics will focus on increasing the visibility of OTT content as well as FAST and AVOD business models. Speaking of complex business models, we'll have presentations, panels, and roundtable discussions that provide attendees an opportunity to go deep on these important topics. We're also holding the second annual Heroes of OTT.X Awards to celebrate professionals in our industry that are playing an important role in delivering the entertainment we all love and value so much. You can find out more and register for all of these at the OTT.X website, OTTX.org. So with that, I will conclude today's webinar and thank you again for joining us. Have a fantastic rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Real pleasure. Take care.